You ever speak to me like that again, better be wearing a cup.
Baby steps.
One break, I'm in
Okay, friends, let's everybody take your positions, please. Here we go. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, rolling. Dave!
And
Dave!
Unchained.
welcome to Dave and Dave Unchained, a Van Halen podcast. I'm Dave.
And I'm Dave.
And we are at episode 59, Dave. We are 10 away from you revealing all.
I know that's your favorite number of all time.
Oh, yeah.
Dave.
Well, you promised. You made a big promise when we started this podcast that we got to 69. You were going to let us all behind the Iron
I
Curtain.
have no recollection.
Oh,
of
yeah.
this
Now you
promise.
got you're in like somebody else I know. No recollection. Before we start, it should be noted that Dave and I will do a full breakdown of Wolfgang Van Halen's week-long Whirlwind press tour and a special segment. There was just too much to put into the news, so that will come after Mailbag. All right, well, we're going to get right into some Van Halen news.
Van Halen.
Well, Dave, we have massive amounts of Van Halen news. We got to get through this. It is massive since Eddie passed. As you well know, there's so much stuff coming out. But let's get right to the tippy top. The Sunset Sound Studios podcast. Oh, my God. Well, there is a man by the name of Brian Kehoe. Is that how you say it, Dave? Kehoe?
You know, I think so, but I can't swear.
I'm going to
it.
spell it. It's Kehew. And he is a recording engineer, and he is the man who went into the Warner Brothers vault. And he's the guy who worked on that box set from Van Halen that was shelved. He's the guy that Eddie Trunk spoke to back in the day when Eddie told us all about what happened. He's the guy who has been inside the Warner Brothers archives. So I want to talk about this. So Sunset Sound Studios, which is an incredible, legendary studios. Now, Van Halen recorded at Sunset Sound for the first 5 albums. So Van Halen 1 all the way through Diver Down, and everybody knows 1984, and everything since then was recorded at 5150. So this is a legendary Van Halen spot. The gentleman, I forgot their names, all three of them, who were working there from Sunset Sound, were put together a podcast. They were talking about, since Ed passed, all the just different Van Halen stuff. They brought Brian Kehoe on, and I hope I'm saying his name right, Kehoe or Kehoe, or it's Kehew. He came on as a guest. Now, he described the vault that Warner Brothers has of unreleased audio of Van Halen. He said it's like a house in the valley. He said it's almost Indiana Jones-style place. He's an independent contractor that was hired to handle unreleased demos, live shows, recordings, everything that's in the vault there. He said that he's been a fan since day one. He's a hardcore Van Halen fan, so he really knows what he's talking about. And he has studied the stuff to crazy depth, he said. Now, he said one thing about Van Halen's very overlooked is, obviously incredible band. Eddie's a, guitar genius, but he said the songwriting is what really made these guys extra special because the songwriting was better than most people realize. And he said the Warner Brothers project came from the earliest tapes from Sunset Sound. They cut over 20 songs in April of 1977, and they had a full repertoire of what was going on there. He said that Bring On the Girls, a song called Bring On the Girls, which eventually turned into Beautiful Girls. He talked about a lot of these songs were early versions of other songs. Like we talked about many years that Van Halen takes songs, they'll make switch lyrics around, use a part from this, use it on there. They like to do that. House of Pain was on there. Mean Street, which was Voodoo Queen back then, and inspired the opening of Mean Street was used in Voodoo Queen. And he said there was multi-track recordings and he made mixes. He said there are not a lot of outtakes. I think they downplayed it over the years. He said there's an entire tape of Eddie Van Halen doing the intro to Little Guitars. So there's a whole mix just with that. He said there's 13 takes of Cathedral. He said to hear them going through this stuff was really, really cool. So he was a fan himself, just really enjoying himself. He said no one thought about outtakes back in the day, that they would literally throw away the rest of the tape that they weren't using, like take 1, take 4, whatever take they weren't using, they would actually throw it away, because back then, no one thought about, archive tapes. They were just talking about the actual record. There's an alternate take of Little Dreamer that exists in there. There's demos of Hot for Teacher with different lyrics, and has Eddie Van Halen on bass. And he said he actually doubled the intro on the bass, probably because they couldn't play it live, so they didn't keep it on the record. And he said that idea was then used on the 1986 David Lee Roth album, Eat 'Em and Smile, which was produced by Ted Templeman, on the song Shy Boy, where Steve Vai and Billy Sheehan took the idea and they doubled the guitar and bass tapping octaves. He said there was a couple of instrumental bits which sounded more like a song without vocals. He said the world is ready for a disc of Eddie Van Halen guitar tracks. He said that this is definitely where it should be going. He said Eruption is really one take. And he actually went through another mic'd recording of Eruption, which was like, I guess, a room mic. It wasn't the other mic that they do, a direct feed, I guess. But it shows you where it was edited in the middle. I guess there was just sort of like a little clink there that they got rid of, hence the little edit there. But he said he did this digging 15 years ago, which is 2005. And this was all prior to David Lee Roth coming back in the band. And he says David Lee Roth has an incredible voice, and he has this great whiskey rough tone to it. He also noted that David Lee Roth took vocal lessons with a guy by the name of Seth Riggs prior to the first record to really improve on his voice. And Brian also said he thinks there's 4 CDs usable of releasable material. That's unbelievable to know. He said Happy Trails is on the demo in 4-part harmony. He said at some point when they were doing the last Van Halen album, A Different Kind of Truth, that Eddie was looking for the original demos, and says apparently this 4 CD box set went to Alex. He has a copy of it, but who knows where it is. He says everything that they did from 1984 onward is all at 5150. So there's nothing in the Warner Brothers archives from 1984 onward that exists in that library that we talked about, that Eddie showed on that MTV clip that we talked about in our October episode. If you haven't seen that, definitely go check that out. That is so worth checking out. They also said that Van Halen recorded part of Women and Children First at Amigos Studios. The interesting part is that Ted really captured them as a live group. And he said that's why they really never recorded a live album, because they recorded the studio live. He called them a ferocious animal that could knock people out. That's how he described Van Halen. Interesting take. One of his all-time favorite Van Halen songs is You're No Good. If you can believe that. He said it's his favorite track of all time because it's stunning how they did that song.
I thought he was referring to the Linda Ronstadt version.
No. He was referring to Van Halen's version. He was saying how dark it was and how they took it to a whole new place. And
yeah, I thought he said his favorite of all time, though, was the Linda Ronstadt version. But perhaps I misunderstood.
No, I think that's what he said because he was praising the hell out of the performance on there. Like, he was talking about the guitar and Alex and Dave with the high-pitched stuff. And he talked about the Linda Ronstadt version, meaning like that was the real pop hit. That was like, she really turned that song into like a real hit song. But he thought Van Halen took it in a really cool and dark and different direction. Regarding the 5150 Fall, he says that's their studio, that's their thing, and it's their job to go through it. There could be some really cool stuff there. Who knows what went on up there at night? He says, I'd like to just hear the brothers jamming. And then he said when he handed in this box set, Sammy was in the group. So I guess maybe it was like more like 2004. He said 15 years ago, but he said it was a bad time to do anything with Dave, meaning like, recordings with Dave on. He says, then when Dave came back, he says they needed a new album. They wanted to do a live record, and it wasn't time to promote the past and the old stuff. And he says down the road somewhere, he hopes it'll be time. That there's not tons and tons, but there's a lot going on there and absolutely top quality material. This is directly from Brian, who has seen and heard the tapes. He credited Don Landy heavily as the engineer. He said he was an unbelievable engineer and Ted was an incredible producer. And he prefers the Sunset Sound studio stuff over 5150. He feels the sound at Sunset Sound was way better. He also praised Michael Anthony, saying they would not be as great had it not been Michael Anthony. His voice made Van Halen have that sound, and he called them a four-headed monster, and he also praised Alex as an absolute ferocious player. He said that Warner Brothers spent a lot of money on Van Halen when it came to promotion because they had something special. They said they were very quick in the studio. And the guy from Sunset Sound, excuse me for not knowing his name, he went through all the invoices. And they would go in there for like 2-3 days or this and that to record. And he said they did it really quick. He said, Pretty Woman, they did in one weekend, and they released it like the next week to radio, which is incredible. The first album, though, they spent more time. He says they spent 33 days working on that album in the studio, so there was a lot of time spent on that one. As we all know, that Ted really wanted to make sure that that album was right on the money because Montrose's album, which was a fantastic debut, didn't hit the way he wanted it to, so he wanted to make sure Van Halen had that. And then they talked about the famous live videos from 1981. He says, is this show filmed? Where's the rest? He says, well, filming can be expensive. If you were running 5 or 6 cameras and the film costs a lot and there was only enough to go for a few songs and they were only going to use them on Midnight Special or Don Kirshner's rock concert, he says, I don't know where the film is. He says, possibly it could resurface or not. But he says there's a reel or two of tape in there. He's not really sure what's on there, but he says if they did a live album, from the first few albums, it would sound really more like the record. So he didn't find anything, I guess, live in there. He says they really weren't focused on live recordings. He said he saw Van Halen for the first time at the US Festival in 1983. Said they were always great. He says, I would really like to hear the Van Halen's White Album. And then one of the guys who was there said, I think Van Halen 3 is Van Halen's White Album, you know? And he says that there is stuff out there with Mammoth playing with Eddie singing in a supermarket parking lot. It's not in the Warner Brothers vault. He says this would be something that maybe Eddie has, but he says that is out there. He also talked about Dave really taking on Jim Dandy Mangram's whole style and approach with the long blonde hair and the open chest and stuff like that. He said very often Dave would even be found going to Jim Dandy shows, filming them. He says,
right. Jim Dandy said that himself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that corroborates that evidence. And when they were talking about Van Halen 3, I really think they were talking about women and children first.
Really?
Yes, because right after they say Van Halen 3, all they talk about for the next 5 minutes or so are women and children first songs. So I really think they got the album title wrong.
I don't know.
They were really talking about women and children first.
Okay. Brian said, I think there's lost films out there. Some things are surfacing soon, I hope. What was the past is suddenly more important now. And he says that he can't see the band going on without Eddie, obviously. He said that I can't see them getting a guy to play guitar and go out as Van Halen. That would just be way too weird. But he says possibly some radio shows could come out and some films, and people will study it more seriously and appreciate the well-crafted songwriting that Van Halen had. He says there's an influence that you can hear from all the different styles of music that Eddie and Alex grew up with, mixed with all the music that Dave listened to. He says they brought it all together in this weird mishmash that is distinctly Van Halen. He also said that he really thinks they need a documentary on Van Halen, and he says not somebody portraying Eddie like they did with Freddie Mercury, like an actual documentary. And he went over Eruption and even played a recording of Eruption on a different mic. He's called it a room mic, an alternate room mic, which was overhead. And you can hear, that's a little less echoey, and you can hear the middle part that they sort of edited out, where there was sort of like a little creak or something you can hear. I guess they just cleaned it up. And there's also a longer fade at the end. He says they never found more outtakes. He said that there wasn't, multiple takes of Eruption. Very often the band was all together. There was less isolation. Now listen to this, Dave. This scared the hell out of me. So we all know that Eddie died on October 6th, 2020. On October 4th, 1977, he recorded Eruption. And on October